1920 was a big year for women in New York and across the nation. It was the year the United States ratified the 19th Amendment, guaranteeing women the right to vote.
We have to celebrate the fact that we have hit that 100-year milestone for the nation. Now, 3 years ago, in 2017, I chaired a commission to celebrate the centennial in New York State. And that gave us an opportunity not just to do a look back and talk about how brave and audacious these women were, even back to 1848 when they had that first women's rights convention. The whole nation was looking at what was going on in Little Seneca Falls. New York is really the epicenter of women's rights. So using that narrative, it propelled us to take that message to our legislators around the state, say, okay, torch has been passed to us, what do we do with it? And if not us, then who?
So 100 years is a good time to reflect. We've made some enormous gains, but much of this has just happened in a blink of an eye. We haven't had many of these rights for very long.
In 1963, the Federal Equal Pay Act prohibited wage discrimination on the basis of gender. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act in 1974 made it easier for women to get credit cards. In 1978, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act outlawed firing women for being pregnant.
This is recent history, but sometimes we forget how many gains have been made, and we don't realize how fragile those gains are.
In his State of the State address in Albany this month, Governor Andrew Cuomo pushed for several items on his women's agenda. Among them, elimination of the pink tax, which charges women as much as 13% more than men for personal care products. Also on the list, eliminating the rape intoxication loophole, and he wants to add sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity to the list of the state's protected classes, to create what he calls a first-in-the-nation inclusive equal rights amendment.
Because New York believes justice delayed for women is justice denied for women.
New York enacted a law last year that expanded the provisions of the state's current equal pay laws. The new act mandates equal pay for substantially similar work. That means men and women in different roles that are substantially similar must receive equal wage rates. State Senator Alessandra Biaggi, a Democrat representing Westchester and the Bronx, wrote the bill.
Equal Pay Act is an example of women and men identifying an issue and trying to solve it through policy, which is, of course, always one of the ways to change culture. I think that we can pass as many laws as we want until we turn blue in the face, but until a majority of people, New Yorkers and Americans and the world really understand and appreciate that women and the work that they do is just as important as the work that our male counterparts do, the law is not necessarily going to fulfill what we're trying to do, which is change the culture and actually have equality.
I think it's a good question to ask, why don't women make the same as men? When women across the board make less than men, there's a problem. When you look at apples to apples, oranges to oranges, education level, job industry, fields, we see that women make less than men, even in female-dominated jobs like nursing.
I was victim to this when I was a young attorney in Washington. Landed at a big law firm, but when I wanted to go to my dream job on Capitol Hill, I was offered a 50% pay cut, which I took because I really wanted to get into public service. But I didn't realize that the men next to me in my new congressional office were making quite a bit more, and they weren't even lawyers. They didn't have the same degree or experience. So we said that you can no longer ask about prior history with respect to salaries, and we think that that's going to be an important barrier that's overcome, that you'll be paid what you're worth for the job, not just a little bit more than your last job.
That's the Salary History Bill. It passed alongside the Equal Pay Act as a package that Cuomo called a victory for women. But he acknowledged in his 2020 State of the State address that there still is a long way to go for women's rights.
And let's be honest, women are still victims of cultural and institutional discrimination. And New York must lead in ending this continuing shameful and repugnant injustice.
I think it's one of those issues that you take on because you know it's bigger than you and you know that it's not going to be solved in your lifetime, and that's okay. But you're putting your voice to it is the justice that it deserves. So let's just keep doing it.
100 years after women were guaranteed the right to vote, New York has several women in prominent government roles. Kathy Hochul is the 4th female lieutenant governor. Andrea Stewart-Cousins is the 1st female leader of the Senate. Letitia James is the 1st elected female state attorney general. Senator Biaggi says that while women still have a fight ahead of them, New York is the place to be.
Women are a majority of the population in the state of New York, and New Yorkers and New York women are just sensational. And we should give them everything that they need to do everything that they can to succeed. Because if you are born here or you live here or you come here, I mean, you're limitless. And so that is what inspires me to be excited for and to fight for the women's agenda.